The passing of the winter window in Scotland saw the continuation of a recent trend. Despite constant stories and rumours linking Rangers with a move for Hearts striker Lawrence Shankland and Celtic with a deal for Aberdeen hitman Bojan Miovski, nothing materialised and both players stayed at their respective clubs. Over the past 3 or 4 seasons, the old firm have been consciously shunning players who ply their trade in Scotland. It wasn't always like this though. In the noughties, Rangers brought in a total of 20 players from Scottish clubs. Their busiest season was in 07-08 when they acquired 6 players. It was a bit of a mixed bag, with Stephen Whittaker, Stephen Naismith and Kirk Broadfoot going on to have good spells at Ibrox, but Alan Gow, Graham Smith and Arturs Vekulius made only a handful of appearances between them. Rangers most frequently did business with Hibernian, bringing in 5 players from Easter Road, a tally which included Kenny Miller, Kevin Thompson and the aforementioned Stephen Whittaker. Arguably, their most successful purchases came from Dundee, from whom they picked up Claudio Condigia, Nacho Novo, Gavin Ray and Zurav Kishnishvili, although Chris Boyd from Kilmarnock was also a bit of alright. In the same period, Celtic acquired 18 players from Scottish clubs. Their busiest campaign was in 06-07 when they concluded deals for 5 players: Paul Hartley, Stephen Presley, Mark Brown, Gary Caldwell and Derek Riordan. Just like Rangers, they raided Hibs most often for 6 players: Didier Agat, Ulrich Lawson, Scott Brown, Chris Killen and Riordan and Caldwell. Celtic broke the record for the largest transfer fee between 2 Scottish clubs when they paid Hibs £4.4 million for Scott Brown, a record which still stands today. Brown went on to spend 14 years at Celtic and captained them for 11 of those, and he won countless trophies. That's good business in my book. Celtic continued to snap up talent from Scottish teams at more or less the same clip in the 2010s, obtaining 16 players across the decade. They picked up the most from Dundee United, 3, Stuart Armstrong, Gary Mackay-Steven and Nadir Chifchi. The 2010s were a strange time for Rangers, to put it mildly. In the first 2 seasons, they had got just 3 players from other teams in the country. The JRs were then relegated to the 3rd division, and their financial situation, coupled with their desire to get back to the Premier League as fast as possible, meant they were forced to rely on the mainly free transfers of players who were familiar with the Scottish game. And in the 4 seasons they spent outside the top flight, they acquired 18 players from clubs in Scotland, almost as many as they had got across the whole of the noughties. Hearts were the most frequent and reliable source for playing staff during this time, as they brought 6 in from Tynecastle: Ian Black, David Templeton, Kevin Kyle, Danny Wilson, Jason Holt and Billy King. This policy was more or less abandoned when they got back to the SPL, as in the last 4 seasons of the decade they signed off on deals for just 6 domestic transfers. The old firm have carried this brutal cutting back into the 2020s, as both teams have brought in only 2 domestically based players in the 8 windows so far. David Turnbull and Benjamin Siegrist have been signed for Celtic. The former was sold to Cardiff City this January window, and the latter seems to be behind Scott Bain in the backup goalie's pecking order. He has made only 2 appearances for the Hoops so far. Rangers have brought in the pair of John Suter and Scott Wright. So, what's going on here? Well, I feel there are several factors at play. Firstly is financial strategy. In recent times, both clubs have been following a player trading model in the transfer market, where they acquire players with a view to develop them and sell them for a profit. The most fertile ground for this strategy has undoubtedly been south of the border, where the opportunist old firm have taken advantage of either the Bosman ruling or the cross-border development rules, which allow them to snap up talent for free or for a paltry sum. Both clubs have seen some huge successes in doing this. Rangers got both Joe Aribo and Calvin Bassey for free, from Charlton and Leicester respectively. After 3 seasons at the club, Aribo was sold to Southampton for €7 million. Bassey had arrived a year later, but was sold in the same window to Ajax for a whopping €23 million. For Celtic, 2 major triumphs have been Moussa Dembele and Jeremy Frimpong. Dembele was a 2016 free transfer from Fulham. After 2 incredible seasons in which he scored 51 goals, Lyon bought him for €22 million. Right back Frimpong was signed for €380,000 from Man City in 2019. He very quickly established himself as a key player in the first team, and after only a season and a half was on the move to Bayer Leverkusen for €11 million. In Germany, he has emerged as one of the most exciting young players in Europe. Todd Cantwell, who Rangers got from Norwich, and Matt O'Reilly, who Celtic got from MK Dons, are potential future success stories. It is not only England, as the two Glasgow Giants have been casting their net far and wide. As well as many other European countries, Rangers have clearly identified Belgium as a hotbed for talent, getting 4 players from the Jupiler Pro League in 4 seasons. Fashion Sakala was a free transfer from KV Oostende in 2021. He was sold to Saudi Pro League outfit Al Faya in the summer of 2023 for €4.65 million. Nicholas Raskin was a €1.5 million purchase from Standard Liège and will most likely net the Gers a tidy profit in the future. Likewise, Celtic have scoured Europe for players that fit their transfer strategy. Poland, Greece, Sweden, Norway, Russia and Portugal, amongst others, have been sources of talent. In recent seasons, however, they have heavily invested in the East Asian market. The arrival of Ange Postecoglou in 2021 sparked an influx of players from the J-League, where he had been managing Yokohama F. Marinos before coming to Celtic. He brought in 6 Japanese players in his 2 seasons at the club. He also signed Hyung-Gyu Oh from South Korea. The arrival of Brendan Rodgers has mainly seen the transfers revert back to a more European flavour. Celtic clearly retain a major interest in exploring what this region has to offer further though, as Hyuk Kyu Kwon and Hyung Jun Yang were brought in from K-League 1 and 2 respectively. Ryo Hatate, who was bought from Kawasaki Frontale for €1.53 million, is a player I really like, and I think he will fetch a pretty penny when he leaves Celtic. So why am I telling you all this? Well, firstly, it's because there is clearly a hard value cap placed upon players who have never plied their trade outside of Scotland. John McGinn moved to Aston Villa for €3.1 million in 2018, following weeks of Celtic lowballing Hibernian over the transfer fee. After only a couple of seasons in the Premier League, he was being touted with a £50 million move to Manchester United. Bologna paid Hearts just €1.7 million for Aaron Hickey in 2020. After 2 seasons in Italy, the first of which was heavily disrupted by injury, his value had skyrocketed, and Brentford forked out €14 million to bring him to the Premier League, where his stock has continued to rise. Lewis Ferguson joined Bologna from Aberdeen for a fee of £3 million. He has been a revelation for Thiago Motta's side, is their captain, and has been heavily linked with a €30 million move to Juventus. Would any of these figures have been possible if these 3 examples moved to Rangers or Celtic instead? Of course, we'll never know, but I personally think not. Aside from some exceptions like Stuart Armstrong, who was bought from Dundee United for €2.2 million and sold to Southampton for €5 million more than that, or Academy products Kieran Tierney and Nathan Patterson, who fetched €27 and €14 million respectively, players who have never played outside of Scotland aren't exactly seen as money-making machines for the old firm. Either the club makes a small profit, like with Ryan Christie, more or less recoups what they paid, as with Lewis Morgan, or make a small loss, as happened with David Turnbull. What is more, other SPL clubs are not daft and will not allow their best players to leave on the cheap. In fact, they are more likely to add a couple of mil onto the price if the old firm are interested. It makes sense. If you're going to weaken yourself and strengthen your opponent, you should be handsomely compensated for it. An example of this in action, I think, would be the case of Scott McKenna. Aberdeen rejected a reported £5 million bid from Celtic for the defender in 2019, demanding £10 million from the Parkhead club. A year later, they sold him to Nottingham Forest for £3 million. And finally, bringing in players from abroad gives the old firm a chance to enlarge their fan bases and to expand their commercial brand into untapped and potentially lucrative markets. Signing Oh from Suwon Blue Wings in South Korea gives Celtic the chance to do that. Signing Kevin Nisbet from Hibernian in Edinburgh doesn't. It seems to me that those in charge of transfer strategy have decided that, generally speaking, getting players from other clubs in Scotland doesn't fit the bill in terms of player trading. But that doesn't tell the full story of what's going on. It doesn't explain why Rangers apparently did not even bother to bid for Lewis Ferguson when he was available. A man with Rangers in his blood and strong connections to Ibrox, yet they let him go without a fight. A year later, they forked out roughly the same amount they could have got Ferguson for on Sam Lammers, a striker who Michael Beale tried to shoehorn into the attacking midfield role that Lewis occupies excellently for Bologna, to some less than impressive results. It also doesn't explain why Celtic spent months fanning about with insulting sub £2 million offers for John McGinn, which ultimately drove him into the clutches of Aston Villa. For me, this is explained by arrogance, by snobbery, the fact fact that the old firm believe that these players are not good enough for them. That feeling starts in the terraces, with the fans who claim the likes of Lewis Ferguson are nowhere near the required standard to wear the jersey, and appears to go all the way up to the top, with those in charge deciding that if they cannot pick players up on the cheap or for free, then it's not worth it. Both Rangers and Celtic have ambitions to be competitive and successful in Europe, and clearly feel that bringing in players from abroad is the way to accomplish that, although this may be a bit short-sighted. Transfermarkt has the makeup of Rangers and Celtic's first team squads at 75% foreigners, which will cause problems in the future when trying to meet homegrown quotas when registering for European competitions. However, this coupled with the transfer strategy aspect probably explains why Celtic did not move for Josh Doig in the summer of 2022. In desperate need of a left back, Doig was one of the most exciting prospects in Scotland, and at the age of 20 had already made 62 appearances in the SPL. He was available for around €3 million. In the end, Doig moved to Hellas Verona in the Serie A, and Celtic took a gamble on the Argentine fullback Alejandro Bernabé for €4.3 million. Some off-field troubles alongside some erratic performances on the rare occasion he got to don the hoops, especially in defence, meant he never won the trust of either Big Ange or Brendan Rodgers, and is currently on loan at Brazilian club Internacional. Doig, on the other hand, just sealed a €6 million move to Sassuolo this winter window. Taking a risk on foreign players who may or may not be able to hit the ground running in Scotland rather than going for ones who have a proven track record in the league is a choice Rangers and Celtic have consistently been making. Rangers chose Danilo and Dessers over Lawrence Shankland. Celtic went for Yuki Kobayashi over Ryan Porteous. But in the case of Bojan Majovski and Celtic, there could be something else going on here. He is 24 and has played in Macedonia and Hungary, and is currently being linked with a move to a host of European clubs, so he could generate a profit in the future. Perhaps Celtic still have a bad taste in their mouth from the last time they moved for a striker who was tearing up the SPL. Nadir Chifchi scored 11 league goals in his debut season for Dundee United, and followed that up with 14 in his sophomore campaign, the same tally Majovski is sitting on now. Despite being handed an 8-match ban for biting Jim McAllister on the leg, Celtic were impressed enough by Chifchi's goals and performances that they not only forked out €2 million to bring him to Parkhead, but gave him the iconic number 7 jersey. He was a massive flop, managing just 4 goals in 26 appearances. While this theory is a bit more speculative, I wonder whether it is playing in the back of the minds of those in charge at Celtic when considering Majovski. The final reason that I think the old firm have been overlooking the Scottish market recently is that the footballing landscape has changed. Not only do Celtic and Rangers no longer have a monopoly on hoovering up the best players in the league, but they are no longer the most attractive option for ambitious players looking to further their career. The successes of Hickey, Ferguson and others has not only piqued the interest of clubs around Europe in what the Scottish market has to offer, but inspired other players to follow in their footsteps and make the move abroad. Right back Max Johnson, who joined Austrian Bundesliga side Sturm Graz from Motherwell last year, said this in a recent interview. "You saw how well Aaron Hickey has done abroad, and now he is playing in the Premier League, and Lewis Ferguson is flying just now. So you see boys who have been brave enough to take the step and move away, and that obviously encouraged me to do it as well." Young talent may well look at the case of Scott Allen, who wasted a year rotting on the Celtic bench before being farmed out on loan, or Jack Hendry and Lewis Morgan, who were never really given a fair crack at the whip and much maligned by the fans. If the choice is between joining one of the old firm and being scrutinised and judged by the fans and press who expect a win every game, as well as more than likely barely playing, or moving down south or to Europe and improving as a player and furthering your career, it would appear to be a no-brainer. So, while Shankland and Majovski may yet end up at Rangers or Celtic, and as a fan of the hoops, I hope we do sign Big Bojan, if this was 10 or 15 years ago, they would have been done deals already. Going forward, I can't see things changing much. I believe Rangers will continue to be opportunistic and look for pre-contract deals when they can, like with Ryan Jack and John Souttar, and I think Celtic are mainly focused on youth in Scotland. They aggressively pursued Dylan Reid but failed to land him, and are now rumoured to be interested in Motherwell starlet Lennon Miller. Whether they will be more successful with him remains to be seen.